46. Moves like a lion. Aloud. I heard Tani before I could see him or spot which way his thumb was pointing. He was laughing as he burst through the door, walking side by side with his opponent. "I know," he said. "You thought I'd blundered when you took my bishop and I just took your pawn, didn't you?" His opponent laughed a little, too, then went to join his parents. It was only then that Tani stuck his thumb up at Coach Sean and me. I pulled him close and gave him a hug. "Did you say a thank you to God?" "Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God." "Well done. Now, I think Coach Sean wants to talk to you." Tani rushed over to the coaches, high-fiving and fist-bumping them all. I sat back and listened. I was expecting there to be a lot of talk about him being 5-0, and perhaps some words about there only being one more game, but they were quiet. Quieter than usual. Coach Sean and some of the others were looking at Tani's notation book. "Why did you do that?" said Coach Sean. "Sacrificing your bishop for a pawn like that. It's not what I would have expected." "And there's another way," said Coach Russ. "A simpler one that could have got you to the same place in the end. Did you see it?" Tani smiled. "I wanted to sacrifice the bishop. I'd seen it before and wanted to try it." "Where?" said Coach Sean. "It was one of Paul Morphy's games. I can't remember which one, though." The conversation moved on, and Tani went to the bathroom. When he came back, Coach Sean was pointing at his laptop. He had added all of the moves into the program and got it to the point where Tani was about to make the controversial move. "You were right," he said, pointing to the screen. "I put the game in, and the computer agrees that the strongest move you could make at this point is to sacrifice your bishop. That earned you 80 points right there." Tani looked surprised. 80 points? Wow! Coach Sean nodded. "You're my lion. All right. It's aggressive and unorthodox. It's pure Paul Morphy."
47. The last game. Tani. I was so pleased that I was 5-0. I wasn't even thinking about the state championship. I was just really, really pleased that I'd been able to think deeper than I'd ever thought before. The coaches talked about me sacrificing the bishop for some time, but when they were finished, they said it was really good. I think Coach Sean was most pleased of all because he held up his hand again to give me 5. He had the biggest smile possible on his face as he said, "This is gonna hurt." And when he gave me 5, it really did hurt, but I was still laughing and so happy about everything that I didn't mind. Pretty soon I started to think about the next game. The last game. The only game I needed to win in order to win the tournament. For the first time that weekend I could feel the nerves going a bit crazy inside of me. Coach Sean had told me to study, and so I found a small space in the corner near where he was sitting and looked at the chess program on his laptop. It lets you put in your moves and then tells you which is the very best move you can make from that position. "That's good," said Coach Sean. "Keep on putting your game in and memorize what the app is telling you. If you're sticking to the number 1 choice, that will be enough." It was hard to really concentrate because the room around me was so loud. But it was loud inside me too. I was feeling nervous. I was also feeling confused because someone had said to me, "You don't need to win. You just need to draw." I had 5 points because I'd won every game, but my opponent had won 4 and drawn 1, so he had 4.5 points. If we drew, I'd have 5.5 and he'd have 5. I understood that all I needed was half a point to beat him, but I'd never really played to draw before. I'd always played to win. The hall was quiet when I went in to play the last game. Normally there were lots of games being played at the same time, but because it was right at the end of the tournament, there were only 2 other games being played. I liked the quiet because it helped me think. I still had to work hard to concentrate on my game. The biggest distraction was the fact that I was playing someone I knew already. Jack Oliver Faisal goes to a different school and doesn't come to any of the chess programs I go to, but I met him at summer camp, and I like him. I was the black chess pieces, and I started the way I wanted to. I'd done exactly what Coach Sean said and memorized the moves I wanted to make as well as the best moves that white should make. Sometimes Jack made the best move, but a lot of the time he didn't. I had the center of the board controlled, and I knew that I was going to win. Maybe it would take 5 more moves or maybe 10. But I knew it. And when I saw him look at the board and hold in his breath and move his hand a few times but not touch a piece, I knew that he was feeling worried. He was nervous, and he knew that I was in a strong position. Coach Sean talks a lot about playing the player and not just the pieces. Seeing him get nervous and unsure of himself like that made me feel really good. On my 14th move, I did something really simple that was going to help me really break into his pawns. I moved my queen to g6. I let go of the queen and sat back to think some more about what he might do and how I could respond. Immediately I realized something that made me feel sick. Moving the queen like that had been a blunder. Not a little blunder or a small mistake. It was a really, really big blunder. The biggest one I'd ever made. I'd opened a door that would ruin everything. If my opponent looked hard enough and saw it, then he'd probably be able to beat me in fewer than 4 moves. I could feel my mouth get completely dry. The more I stared at the board, the more I could see that I was lost. Totally lost. There was no way that I could play my way out. It was over. Unless I could get a draw. I made myself sit up straight and smile, and I stuck my hand out and said in my most confident voice, "I offer a draw." He looked at me hard. He was trying to read me. I kept my eyes on his and waved my hand to remind him that I wanted him to shake it. I didn't want him to look at the board, because if he did, he might see that he could win. He opened his mouth to speak, then said, "I accept." We shook hands, and I walked back to the team room. I felt bad. I didn't like that I'd drawn, and I really didn't like that I'd made such a blunder. Everyone was staring at me as I came in. I held a fist up and stuck my thumb out sideways. I felt heavy and slow and not at all happy. Coach Sean came over to me and held out his hands. I said, "I drew." He grabbed me. He asked, "Do you know what you just did?" I said, "Yes, I drew. It was a tough game." "But you drew. That means you won. You're the New York State champion." Then he shouted out so loud that I thought my ears might burst, "Tani drew. He's the champion." Coach Russ shouted to me, "Tani," and picked me up and held me so high in the air that I thought I was going to hit the roof. "You're state champion. You won." I said, "I did. But I really blundered, and he was going to beat me." "But he didn't," Coach Russ said. Just then the door opened again, and my friend Zishi came in. He was smiling, and his coach ran over to him, and he started shouting to the room that he'd won his age group Division II. I could feel the excitement start to burst inside me like fireworks. All the nerves and all the bad feelings about not winning suddenly disappeared. Instead, I felt so great and excited and happy that I joined Zishi in doing a really long floss dance that was so good all the coaches and adults in the room were laughing so hard they were nearly crying. Mom came over, and when she'd finished giving me a hug, she looked at me. She didn't have to remind me because I was already chanting, "Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God."
48. A trophy as tall as Tani. KO'd. Wow. That was all I could say as I held my phone and stared at the screen. So I said it again. Wow. I was watching the video that Oluwatoyin was sending me, live. Austin was crowded in next to me, and I could feel that he was just as excited as I was. On the small screen, Tani was holding out his hands to receive a trophy that was almost as tall as he was. His smile was as wide as I'd ever seen it, and the noise of cheering and shouting was cracking through the speaker. "You won. You're state champion," I said when the cheering had died down a little, and we were able to talk to him ourselves. I was hardly able to believe it. Austin smiled at him. "I knew you'd do it," he said. "I'm proud of you, little brother." Before we could talk much more, the call cut out. But our smiles lasted for hours.
49. A story worth sharing. Oluwatoyin. Tani was exhausted. For the first hour of the journey back from Saratoga Springs to the city, he tried to resist sleep, but the tiredness finally won, and he soon lay slumped against me. It was midnight by the time we pulled up on Park Avenue outside the shelter, and I wondered whether I was going to have to carry him into the elevator. But once the van filled with cold air, he woke, saw his giant trophy, and sprang back to life. The next day was a regular Monday. There were all the usual chores to do, the usual bags to pack, and there was the usual homework to remember. Aud left early to catch the city's first commuters as they arrived at nearby Grand Central, and Austin had an early basketball practice. Miss Maria handed Tani a donut before I took him to school, and we talked about the day ahead as we walked. It was only as we reached the school gate that Tani mentioned anything having to do with chess. "Do you think they'll let me bring my trophy to school, Mom?" I told him that I was sure they would, and we said goodbye. I was nearly back to the shelter when Coach Russ called. His voice was hoarse, and he sounded like he had been talking all night, but he was still full of excitement. "Mrs. Adewumi, are you still living in the homeless shelter on Park Avenue?" "Yes, Coach Russ." "Okay. Well, I was thinking that maybe I could talk to some people about you and see if I can get a journalist to share your story. Would you be willing to talk to someone about Tani's progress in chess and how you had to leave Nigeria? Do you think anyone would be interested? Do people even want to read about chess players?" You'd be surprised. A few years ago, I coached another kid whose family were hardworking immigrants from Bangladesh. The boy had played a little chess before, but not a whole lot. Within 2 years, he was the best player in the country in his age group. The kid got offered a place in one of the best private schools in the country, and he went on to win 4 national championships. I was impressed. But winning the nationals and winning the state tournament are not the same, are they? That's true, but there's something about your story that I think people will connect with. Maybe talk it over with your husband and let me know what you think. I did just that. Aud was like me at first, unsure that anyone would be interested enough to write about Tani. It wasn't that we were not proud of what he'd done, we were, but we knew that there were other children who had higher scores and more trophies than Tani. And as for being a hardworking refugee family, well, we knew that New York was full of people just like us. The way we saw it, there was nothing too unusual about the story. But I said to Aud, I think Coach Russ is right when he says that the press likes stories about chess players. As well as the family from Bangladesh, Coach Russ had told me about another chess player whose story went public. I had spent some time Googling him and was so inspired. The man was named Major Juak, and he was from Sudan in East Africa. When he was 7, the war that had been raging in his country for years finally reached his village. Rebel soldiers sent him and many of the other boys in the village away, and they walked for 2 days without stopping, not knowing where they were going. Their journey continued, and they walked for months, covering hundreds of miles until they arrived in Ethiopia. But when the government there was overthrown, they were forced to turn around and walk all the way back to Sudan. For a total of 5 years, he walked. It was a dangerous journey, and he saw so much death that it lost the power to shock him. When he finally settled in a refugee camp in Kenya, he had to struggle to survive on a handful of food each day. When he was 19 years old, some aid workers gave the refugees a chess set. Major would watch the Sudanese soldiers play during the day, studying the game. Then at night, when the men were out, he and a friend would quietly enter the game room, set up the board, and play. In time, he was invited to live in America and was granted asylum. He took a job as a security guard in a grocery store, but played chess in his spare time. Eventually, he ended up in New York, working for Coach Russ. Several newspapers told his story, and as I read the comments that readers left at the bottom of each article, I understood a little more why Coach Russ thought that a journalist might want to tell Tani's story. Major's journey shone bright in my mind. But it wasn't the only one. In my searching, I discovered another article about a gifted chess player in New York whose life was transformed by the game. But this time, the player was not a stranger to me. It was Coach Sean. And yet the 16-year-old Sean Martinez described in the New York Times piece from 2007 was almost completely different from the Coach Sean whom Tani adored. The article called him a teenage riddle. Sean skipped months of school, and on the day he was supposed to represent his school as they tried to retain their national high school title, he was nowhere near the tournament. Instead, he was on Wall Street, playing blitz chess with the bankers for $10 a game. The article told of Sean's early life, how he had been removed from his mother when he was 1 week old and adopted by a woman named Lydia Martinez. His father had died when Sean was 2, and much of his life, the article said, had been difficult. But the thing that surprised me more than anything else was the fact that Sean told the interviewer that he had never read a chess book. He said they were boring. I could not imagine Coach Sean ever talking like that. I had been in more than enough team rooms and midweek sessions to know that Coach Sean always encouraged his students to push themselves hard. He was always urging them to work hard, to study, to learn from the masters of the past. I could recognize the beginnings of Coach Sean in the description of Sean Martinez, just like I could recognize him in the photo. But whatever happened in the 12 years between the article and the present day must have been dramatic. Reading these two articles changed my opinion about Tani being interviewed by a journalist. Perhaps if Coach Russ could persuade someone to run a story, no matter how small the number of readers, maybe just one of them might be inspired and encouraged by Tani's story. Once I'd told him about what I'd read, Audiobook agreed, and I phoned Coach Russ back to tell him to please go ahead and begin his search for a journalist. "That's great news," he said. "And I've been wondering about something else too. If we can get the story out there, would you like me to set up a fundraising page for you?" He was on speakerphone. Audiobook and I looked at each other, confused. "Fundraising for what, Coach Russ?" said Audiobook. "To help you guys move out of the shelter. Maybe we can raise $10,000 and help you move on somewhere. What do you think?" I thought it was ridiculous. Nobody was going to give us $10,000, no matter how good the article was. The whole thing was a waste of time. Audiobook had a different concern. "We have never begged. All this time that we have been in America, we have never begged. I do not wish to start now." "That's okay," said Coach Russ. "It won't be like that. I promise. I can be the one doing the asking instead of you. Would that be okay?" We were quiet. Audiobook looked thoughtful, then surprised me by saying that he was happy with that. "And you, Mrs. Adewumi? Are you okay with it?" "If my husband is happy and you think it is worthwhile, I am." "That's great," said Coach Russ. "And if none of this works out, then we'll hold a fundraiser in the school and see if we can raise enough money to get you out of the shelter and into a studio apartment." We didn't hear again from Coach Russ for the rest of that Monday. He did send us some messages saying he was still working on it, but that he had not yet been able to find anyone to take the story. It wasn't until Tuesday afternoon that he phoned. "Are you ready for that interview?" I said I was, though my guess was that after trying for more than one whole day, whoever he had been able to persuade to do the interview would not be writing for a popular newspaper. "Great. He wants to interview you all at PS 116 on Thursday morning. He's named Nicholas Kristoff, and he writes for the New York Times. You should Google him first. I thanked him and did what he said. Wow, I said quietly when I saw that he had won not one but two Pulitzer Prizes. He's impressive.
50. An outpouring of generosity. KO'd. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and stared at the webpage on my phone. This 8-year-old chess champion will make you smile. The second I saw the photo of Tani staring at a chessboard on the New York Times website, I had tears in my eyes. There was a smile on my face as well, especially as I read on. Nicholas Kristof had written a perfect summary of Tani's story. He explained our situation correctly and had great quotes from so many of the people who had helped Tani along the way. Tani's school principal called it an inspiring example of how life's challenges do not define a person. Coach Russ said, "Tani is rich beyond measure." Mr. Kristof even ended with my own words, "The U.S. is a dream country. Thank God I live in the greatest city in the world, which is New York, New York." What I liked most about the piece was the single-line summary right at the top. Overcoming life's basic truth, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. Yes, I said to my empty car. That is the truth. Ever since the Boko Haram militants visited my print shop and tracked me down to my home, we had experienced the slow suffocation of opportunity. The opportunity to work, to earn, to live freely, and to dream. All of those had been taken from us in Nigeria. It was the same story in Dallas too. The opportunity to belong to the family, to find work and make a new life for ourselves, that was held back as well. Without opportunity, life had grown weak. It had become a shadow of what it was, a pale imitation of what it could be. New York had changed all that. A homeless shelter was all the opportunity we needed to build a home. A $6 an hour job washing pans was all the opportunity one needed to build my work again. And the community of chess coaches and church friends was all we needed to build a new family again. The article was a triumph. Even though we had only spent an hour or so with him the day before, I felt as though Nicholas Kristof knew us and understood our story with the greatest wisdom and insight possible. I read the piece through again and again. When I reached the end for the third time, I noticed something I had not seen before. It wasn't just Oluwatoyin, me, and Coach Russ who had read the piece. Someone else who I had never heard of before had left a comment. It said, "An inspiring, well-timed, true story to remind Americans of who we aspire to be." Moving and uplifting, wrote another reader. The side of our nation we all need to celebrate and promote. All too often, our society discourages aspiration, especially for kids with darker skins. We are blessed to have Tani and others like him who don't want to give up. They kept on coming. More and more comments, and all of them positive, all of them saying the same thing, that Tani's story had touched them. Coach Russ phoned me. He was laughing so hard that I struggled to understand him at first. "It's crazy, isn't it?" he said. "But just wait. I've set up the GoFundMe page, and Nick Kristof says he's going to put a link to it at the bottom of the piece. Let's see what happens then." I was at home by the time the link appeared on the New York Times piece. It took readers through to the page that Coach Russ had set up. It explained a little of Tani's story, including that we were living in a homeless shelter. "Tani is all heart," wrote Coach Russ. "Let's all show our heart and help Tani's family secure a home where he can continue on his journey." Coach Russ had put the target at $25,000. Oluwatoyin and I had both agreed that this was a lot of money and that even if we achieved just half that amount, we would be so happy. But just as with the comments on the article, people started to donate to the appeal. Within 30 minutes, we had raised more than $1,000. In an hour, we were above $3,000. And by the time 4 hours had passed and I was ready for bed, the $10,000 target had already been met. I looked closely. Some of the donations were large, as much as $100 or more, but almost all of them were $5, $10, or $15. Throughout the next day, whenever I was not driving, I checked the New York Times piece and the GoFundMe page. The comments and contributions were both rising steadily, and every time I checked, the numbers left me amazed and awestruck. Coach Russ called in the afternoon. "I think we've got to increase the target. What do you think about $50,000? I was still stunned by the whole thing. That is a lot of money, I replied. But if you think it's the right thing to do, then I trust you. I really do. This is connecting with people in such a deep way, and I don't think it's anywhere near being done yet. He was right. Increasing the target did not stop the donations. If anything, they seemed to be coming in even faster. And it wasn't just the GoFundMe page or the article that was attracting attention. I started to receive Facebook messages from journalists and producers who wanted to talk to us. Coach Russ had them, too, and soon we had a list of people to call back from New York One, CNN, and NBC. Even President Clinton's office made contact and asked if we could schedule a time to visit him. 1 week after the piece was first posted online, the story was still going. If anything, it was bigger than ever. The smaller donations were still coming in, but most days there were also some big ones as well, donations so big that I struggled to believe it. Several people in groups donated $1,000, 2 people donated $5,000, and 2 even gave $10,000. The story went international. We had calls from TV stations in Germany and Japan, Mexico, and China. The BBC in London wanted to meet, the Canadian government sent a beautiful chessboard, and a friend back home in Nigeria told me that most newspapers and TV stations carried the story, which then led to Tani's name being discussed in the Senate in Nigeria, where the president was urged to acknowledge his success and give him honor. I even heard that in Morocco they passed a law that all school children should be taught chess. We said yes to more than 15 of these interview requests, and soon we were almost familiar with the questions we were asked. But then, 2 weeks in, I received a call from Coach Russ that left me shocked and speechless. "I've taken 2 calls this morning," he said, "and you're not going to believe what's happened. Are you driving? You should pull over." He paused while I told him I needed to find somewhere to park. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I forced myself to concentrate on taking the car safely to the side of the road. "I am parked now. What is it? Is it bad news?" "No, it's not bad news. It's the most amazing news we've heard yet. Someone emailed me this morning, and they're offering to buy you a car. Brand new." He let the words hang for a moment. "But that's not all. I've just had a call from someone else. He wants to pay your rent for a year. Kaode, you're getting out of the shelter. You hear me?" I heard him. I heard him loud and clear. But at that moment I could say nothing in reply. All I could do was shake my head and offer a prayer of thanks.